All right, today we're going to look at bringing in a database, an SQL database into Android using what's called an Object Relational Mapper, ORM. So you may not have seen an ORM before, so let's talk a little bit about what an ORM is. So I'm going to follow this link here. This is a Stack Overflow question asking, what is an ORM? How does it work? Someone suggests I should use one and talks about this. And the top answer here is a fair number of upvotes and does a pretty good job of setting this up. So again, ORM is an object relational mapper. It's lets us map or translate uh, SQL relational database tables into like Java objects or some sort of object-oriented language like Java. It does that mapping for us. So again, an ORM is just a library. The library we'll be using is called Room, which is the Android version of it. There's lots of other ones out there like Hibernate and things like that. So most platforms have one or two different libraries that they use for these ORMs. So then you don't have to necessarily write SQL so much. It at least you have to know SQL, but it actually writes the specific SQL for you and sets things up here. It does some nice things. It forces you into this. In this case, they're talking about model MVC, model view controller architecture, but in our we've updated that to model view model architecture. You don't have to worry about writing poor SQL. It will write the SQL for you. You just set a format for the SQL generally. It also writes and manages the SQL so that you don't have to worry about some of the security problems with SQL injection. In the old, especially in websites, it was common just to take text from the website and put it in, paste it in part of your SQL, and that would cause lots of security problems. And so this gets rid of this, and it's all handled by this library for us. So that's what we're going to be doing here. And so we're going to look at Android's guide to a room here. So here's how to save local data. Now, this is going to save data locally on your device using SQLite, a small SQL database on your phone or tablet. Now, we'll also look at saving things in the cloud, and those are usually done with a non-SQL database here. So eventually we'll look at Android's version of that, which is generally called Firebase or Firestore, which will let us store data in the cloud. But this is local, so this is storing data locally here. Talks a little bit about setup. We don't have to worry about too much about this setup here. That's done by Android Studio automatically. But here's the general layout here. This is our app. We will create entities, so this would be like Java classes that we want to store in the database for us. From those, we'll create data access objects, DAOs. This is a common abbreviation when working with databases and setting things up. So this will try to show how to write these entities into SQL, and then we'll deal with the room database kind of. So there'll be a couple different things we have to create to get this to work for us. So here's a little sample example where we're storing user information, just the user's name. And again, I switched this to Java so we can see it. So the first thing we do is create a data entity. So this is a Java class that we're going to want to store inside the database. So it's just an integer ID, first name, last name is 2 strings. We've added some information, some call out fields to define these as an entity and what mark some as one thing as a key, and then some information, particularly if we want the name in the database of that field to be slightly different than here. We can set that up. So we define an entity. We then define our DAO, our data access object. So this is our DAO, and what we do is specify a number of queries that are going to be used. And again, this is where the SQL comes in. So this is actually quite specific to SQL. So you may not have had much SQL yet. If you have, these should be very familiar. If not, we'll just try to explain the basics of them and not go too much over it. But this one is getting all the users, all the information from the user table here. So we select star would be all the users and all the fields from the user table in our database. And so this is the query we're actually running, and then again, so this is the basic SQL that we're going to be using, and this is the the command for it, and what it's returning, it's going to return a list of users, and users are this class we defined up here. There are other users for like inserting a new user to the table or deleting. Now, some of these we don't have to put in any SQL. It will generate the SQL for us. So there is SQL for inserting and deleting, but again, we don't have to remember that. We generally just have to write some specific select statements if we need to for that. And then we have to set up the database itself here and create a database. We'll actually put this in a separate class, generally called a repository sometimes, and set this up here. And here we create, using the DAO that we defined above, we create a database for that. So, okay, and then we build the database here, and then we can create a DAO object, and then get information from that. So that's a basic example of this. Let me close this and this. Now let's go back. Next thing we're going to want to do is look at a long collab that walks you through an example of that, and that'll be in the next video.